So in week 2 of our MOOC, we've been talking about the various different ways in which we can encourage our students to collaborate with each other, to interact, to really help them get engaged and into their learning. And I've got a series of tools and techniques that I'd like to find out if you've used them, if you have experience of trying them out. So the first is blogging, so blog tools. Eileen, have you used blogs at all in your teaching?
I'm not sure that I really have, although I taught something with Tim, who used a blog to kind of start, I suppose, a conversation around the topic. So every day he added a blog topic that was within a virtual learning environment. I mean, I like blogs myself, and I would have. I think I'd like to use them. I haven't found an opportunity.
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same. I haven't used them, but I'd be interested to find a way that I could and that the students interact and promote that. But I haven't done so far.
I'm not at all sure about blogs, and I have thought about it and felt that it's a bit like grandstanding, because people who write blogs are, you know, experts, and they put themselves out there, a bit like journalists or something, which is great, but it's not quite the way that a student feels about what they've got to say. So that was one feeling, which is one reason I haven't really used them. But now I'm just about to think about using one, because we were talking about the future of technology, and in my master's class we've been looking at very bad predictions of what technology is going to be. So we're taking a kind of critical approach, and at the same time students have been doing kind of digital show and tell exercises where they create their own description of some way in which they've used or experienced the use of technology. And these are great descriptions of what they're actually doing now in their teaching with technology. And if you look back at the predictions of the future sort of 5 or 6 years ago, it's nowhere near. It's completely wrong. So there is something called the IOE blog, which is where IOE experts, the Institute of Education experts, write something about a topical issue. And I thought perhaps along with my class we could contribute to this on the issue of how easy is it to predict the use of technology, and you know what actually happens, and here's what people predicted, and here's what teachers are actually doing, which is really interesting, and wouldn't you like to see all these examples? So you can just have links through to what the students have done and how they show this, which would be actually quite useful, I think, for other classes and groups and PG students at the Institute and so on. And I could imagine that sort of approach being used for blogs, where it's a bit more collective, really, in all sectors of, you know, right down primary and secondary, professional development, anything. It's more of a collective kind of approach.
And I think it's, you know, you mentioned it was kind of a daunting thing for students potentially. It's less daunting, isn't it, if you've got more people contributing, and then you know, and I think it can be potentially quite thrilling to like really have something that's in public and then to get comments back. But yeah, I think I've thought that myself, that group blogs would be much more effective.
Actually, it was interesting when I first mentioned this idea to the students. There wasn't as much interest as I expected. I thought they would all go, "Oh, great," but they didn't. And then one of them said, "Well, who would write the blog?" And I said, "Well, I would." And they went, "Oh," which is actually affirms what, you know, that's the nature of how you feel about a blog, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about ownership and taking responsibility.
Yes, taking responsibility, definitely.
And I've always, I suppose, been misguided about a blog, because I did think it's essentially a one-person show, and I didn't see how we could link external students to that. But
well, that's the common way it's used.
Yeah.
It's true. It is a very personal statement.
That's right, and I think that probably puts students off, and they think, well, I'm not going to be doing that. But it's interesting to look at how you broaden that out to group discussion or group use.
Yeah, and there are other roles that people can have within a group blog. For instance, you know, just trying to promote it and using the other kinds of social media to draw people back to the blog. So, you know, that might be less scary for them, you know, to contribute maybe some ideas, but then, you know, to promote the end result.
Great, some great ideas coming from here. On the other side of the coin from blogs are wikis, and I was wondering if you've got experience using wikis in your teaching. Steve, have you had anything?
I have tried this, and it was slightly negative in the sense that some of the more vocal students took over, and they seemed to be having arguments amongst themselves, and other students sat back. So for me at that moment in time, it didn't achieve what I wanted it to do, and maybe I should revisit this, but it really did put a lot of students off at that moment in time. So I'm a bit reluctant to use them, but it'd be interesting to see what other people's experiences are.
I think that's a very good reaction there, Steve, because you say, you know, it didn't really work for me. Doesn't mean to say it never could.
That's right.
And quite a lot of times when people are experimenting with technology, it doesn't quite work. And then they say, well, look, it's just, you know, it's obviously technology is of no use. It's not necessarily the case, and figuring out new ways and trying it a different way. And I've had a similar kind of experience with trying to use the wiki tool in Moodle, and it was clunky, it didn't work terribly well, and everybody got a bit cross with it. And so I haven't gone back to it. Doesn't mean I've rejected it, but you know, the business of figuring out how to make that a smooth and interesting educational experience, I haven't got to it yet. So it is problematic, but I think it's important that you say, don't necessarily assume, therefore, that one experience means it could never work.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a reflective process for me, and that technology is in my armoury, should I choose to bring it out again. It wasn't necessarily the technology, it was the actual cohort of students at that time, maybe.
Or the way you introduce it sometimes.
Yeah, the way I structure it.
How they're prepared
Absolutely.
for it.
Yeah.
Because now that you know the way it can turn out, you might introduce it in a different way when you run it again.
Absolutely.
Back when I was teaching sociology, I had some great experiences with wikis, with cohort of students who, I mean, they were like terribly busy, they were going all over the place. So it was, I wanted them to do group presentations, but I knew it was going to be kind of tricky for them to be in the same place in order to create the presentation together. So I asked them to create wiki pages, and I made a big point to get them to include videos and images, and, you know, so that it would be visually appealing. And in class, so therefore they could, you know, collaborate on it. Not necessarily at the same time, although some of them actually did, as they described it to me. But and then they, in class, you know, they talked through their wiki page as opposed to giving the, you know, using PowerPoint and another kind of presentation idea. And it worked extremely well. And I do think that, you know, being able to use other kinds of things than words, you know, the sort of like including videos and images is something that is often underused, because that's what I was appealed by, you know, that they could just link to YouTube videos, for instance. But I mean, that was a few years ago, and the tool I used, which was Wikispaces, I don't know if it feels that contemporary anymore. And actually, you know, I was just thinking that maybe that's using a blog like WordPress, for instance, for that same effect. That could be just as good now. In fact, more relevant to this kind of skills that students are going to need later on.
What I feel is a contemporary tool at the moment that everyone seems to be using or trying to use is Padlet, and we've got an activity in this MOOC where we've asked participants to try out a Padlet, a virtual wall to put their thoughts on. Have any of you used Padlet in your teaching?
Yes,
Diana?
a lot. It's just such a great little tool. It's so simple, and everybody loves using it, and you do feel it's a contributory process, and people get a lot from what each other puts up there. I think it works extremely well. In some contexts, you have to then bring people back to a discussion, because you can't discuss within Padlet.
Oh, but you can now.
Well, actually, that's true. Yes. I mean, that is now changing. We haven't been able to do that before.
No, that's right. We asked for these features, and they gave them to us.
Yeah.
So that's as important. Yeah.
Where have you used Padlet?
Pretty much everywhere. Any online. I mean, because the thing is that you don't have to log in. You can just double click, and you know. So that means that there's none of these blocks. You know, it's quite an immediate thing, and it's a very visual thing, so that you can call up web pages just by putting in a link and they appear directly there, or videos or images. I mean, on the other hand, I mean, one of the beauties of Padlet is that it is really simple, and now with you can reply in the comments, I mean, and you can add different kinds of media. I mean, sometimes these things, the minute things get a little bit difficult, then people will have problems with it. So I think we should use the features sparingly, in a sense. But it's been very effective. I mean, in some of the MOOCs that we've run, you know, we've had vast walls of you know, contributions of like really rich media, and in one MOOC we kind of used it to kind of create more interaction by getting people to post on Padlet and then discuss somebody else's post in the forum, so that you kind of you know, you had sort of some shared experience to begin with.
Let's talk about forums and discussion forums. Steve, do you use discussion forums much?
Not at all, no. I did it once a few years ago, and it was very, unless you had the students doing some form of assessment within it, they didn't really want to participate. So I haven't used it. I use it within Moodle now just to send messages to the cohort of students, and that's about it. So I'm very lax on that front, but if people are using it in an interesting way, I would look at that and see where I could go with it.
You know, context is everything, because I use it a lot in the module that I run, and students are terrific at commenting on each other's work, and I usually say make your comment within 100 words or 200 words or something like that, because people can, you know, they can write yards of stuff. And comment on at least 2 other posts or something like that. So there are some set criteria for it. But they are really good discussions very often, and they go on, you know, they have long conversations sometimes. And then in another course where I'm teaching one session within a whole 10-week module, and they use Moodle primarily for places to put the slides and a few resources. And every year, I gamely put up my slides and I create a forum, and I say, you know, let's have a discussion about the things in the session and ask me any questions you like. Every year, absolutely nothing happens in that forum, absolutely nothing. And I think it's because those students are not in the habit, they don't see that as something which happens within that particular course. So the context is so different. On the MOOCs that we've run, in the context of Coursera, it was much more difficult to get discussions going, although I must say teachers are very good. In FutureLearn, it's much easier, because with every step you have an opportunity to write comments. You just get used to getting into the flow of doing that, I think. And again, they get so much from each other. It's fantastic. So I think it's all about context and expectation, and just getting used to the idea that actually I do get something out of this myself.
I've used discussion forums in online courses where they've been assessed, you know, so that the students actually get graded on their contributions. And that really does improve the quality and frequency with which they post. You don't always want to do that, but incentives like that. I think the thing is, it is quite hard to do. You know, it's easier to talk, isn't it, than it is to write. You have to write in particular ways, and you know, you can't kind of fudge things you don't understand. So you know, so it is as well, in a sense, to give incentives to students to do it. In your courses, Diana, the contributions to the discussion, they're part of participation, are they? For attendance of the course. Yeah, so that they have to do it. And even though, you know, you may not want to like kind of force people, that sometimes you do need to, because otherwise people won't do things that they're a little bit worried about doing. But you can have great conversations, great discussions. And you learn a lot from them as absolutely, well. Absolutely.
But I'm also aware sometimes of the language issue, because we have a lot of students from overseas for whom English is not their first and sometimes not their second language. And launching forth into making this public, permanent contribution to this group in a very foreign language is tough.
It's tough.
And I don't know what to do about that. And I haven't really done anything about it, except to say I recognise it's difficult.
Well, some of the default settings in virtual learning environments are that students can't edit their post, whereas as a teacher you often can. So like in Moodle you can alter the permissions. I'm sure you can do that in Blackboard as well. But it's like, what's that about? Because if you could edit what you were writing, would make a huge difference, because everybody's had that experience. You press submit and you think, oh, how could I have spelled that wrong, or
Yes,
so,
that's very important, I agree.
yeah, or anonymous posting. Sometimes people do that, don't they, in discussions? Maybe asking, for evaluations at the end of a module, you could have an anonymous forum, and then that encourages people maybe to post, or questions, that they might have that they didn't feel that they wanted to own up to.
It's also getting to be something that people do in their normal lives more.
Yeah.
So as that becomes more common, you might find if your students 5 or 6 years ago weren't doing it, students now are different than they were 5 or 6 years ago. I've noticed a huge change actually in the digital capabilities of students just over the last few years.
Yeah.
I was going to say, in your experience from the student perspective, how do they feel about using the technology to do that and actually putting stuff out there? I guess they're very familiar with it now.
I think they are, yes, and they like it. I mean, I certainly recognise that some time ago that was not necessarily the case, but it is changing so much and people are getting used to doing that. But doing it for your leisure time is very different from doing it in your academic practice, of course, and that's where you want to really think about what you're saying, make sure it's all right and it's intelligible and so on. So it is different, but nonetheless there's a readiness to do it now.
I think so, and when I've talked to students, they've been kind of a bit frustrated when the tutors are not doing it, because they are willing and they want to engage.
I think in my prehistoric mindset, I always think that there will be some students, unless they're forced to do this, would be very much on the peripheral, or possibly wouldn't participate, so you wouldn't get an even distribution. But I don't know whether that's important.
It doesn't matter really, because you get a lot through the vicarious experience of seeing other people's conversation. I mean, if you think of the real world, of the physical classroom, you've got 30 students or something in a classroom, you never get a conversation with absolutely everyone participating. But that doesn't mean that you don't get a lot from seeing what other people have to say, how they respond to each other, how the argument develops. That's also important.
Yeah, I remember you saying, Diana, that you had to just be able to imagine that you could take part in a discussion for it to have that kind of benefit, because you rehearse what you would have said, even if you don't actually get to post, as long as you know that you could have. So.
You could.
And in fact, online discussions are potentially quite good for those kind of shy students who don't want to speak in a face-to-face situation.
Yes, it's liberating for many students who couldn't actually say anything in a face-to-face classroom, because they're much too shy to do that, and they become vociferous online. I mean, you can see that kind of shift as well. So that's great.
And I guess if you're teaching face-to-face and delivering distance learning at the same time, it's about inclusivity as well. You can incorporate the distance learners into a conversation.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's important.
That's good.
Thank you. So from asynchronous communication to synchronous communication, I'm interested in experience of using web conferencing software as a way of virtually having a class or conversing with students. Do any of you use any tools like that?
Yes, yes. I use Collaborate, and that's for the online students who can't come to the campus class. What I find there is it can be very difficult to get students talking, because it's like you're broadcasting. It's like being on the radio or something. So I always begin the session by making sure I get everybody to press the talk button and say something, even if it's just about where you are and what time of day it is or something. So they just know it's fine to do that. So you do have to quite encourage people. And of course, when it's synchronous, in the space of even an hour, you can't have more than about 8 or 10 people actually engaging in conversation. So again, that vicarious experience is an important element, because most people are not actually talking, but as Eileen says, they might, they could, so they're kind of thinking that they could. But these things are all different, I think, from learning through collaboration. Now we're talking, this is a session about, the topic is collaboration. And I think there's an important difference between learning through discussion, where you're talking about things, you might be challenging each other, but you don't have to chase it down to absolutely agreeing about something. And that's what collaboration adds. If you've got to collaborate with your colleagues to produce the definition or the description or the case study analysis or the project outcome or something, then you've got to work harder to get that, which means you're doing a different kind of thinking than if you're just kind of basically having a chat. So I think those two things are quite different.
No, I haven't used it in terms of teaching yet, but I use it in terms of pastoral care. So I will often use Skype chats or Google Hangouts with distance learners and get a group together and discuss issues. So in terms of pastoral, yes, and it works very well, and you know, you can set the dynamic going and then leave people to it, and it works incredibly well. But apart from that, no, I'm quite limited in my expertise there.
That's a great example though, so it's not just about the pedagogy. Yeah. Eileen, any examples you'd like to give?
Well, I suppose using Skype for tutorials is something that I've with doctoral students, you know, that I supervise using Skype, and I mean I've been amazed actually how you can develop really quite you know, powerful relationships with people on Skype, and you don't know that that's going to happen when you start. You think, oh, this is going to be a bit weird, but after a while, and it just means that you can have students in the Middle East or in America, and you know, and it's all just as if they were in your living room. I mean, I've used, I've taught, I had the same experience as Diana with teaching using web conferencing, Adobe Connect I used, and difficulties getting students to talk because they were expecting a particular format, which was the lecture, and I, you know, and they would engage in polls or, you know, but it was really minimal, and none of them had their webcams on, and none of them wanted to speak, you know, and it, like you were saying with the discussion forum, it was really impossible to shift. You couldn't change it once it's been established. So I think one of the key things is to think right from the beginning, you know, take some time to set up the expectations, how you use that tool, and how and what it's for as well, because you don't want to be giving lectures, you know, on web conferencing software, because you know, you could do that in a different way, like with the videos we've been talking about, whereas actually being able to see each other and hear each other is really valuable, particularly if you're teaching a distance education type of class. And so
I think the seeing and hearing is different and interesting, because so much of the time when we're working synchronously online, we're not bothering to use the video camera, because a lot of the time you're looking at the same document or the same slide or something like that, and that's the visual focus. Yeah. So we sometimes bring up the camera at the very beginning or at the very end, just so you know who people are and where they are, which is kind of nice. Yeah. But you don't get eye contact. You know, the representation of visual presence is still terrible online. People are always looking at your forehead or your chin or something. And it's
yeah. But I mean, absolutely. But I think another way of seeing that is that you, because if you basically are connecting with people just using text, you know, in writing, in forums and things like that, everything's always so rehearsed and so like performed, as it were.
You have the synchronous audio. The voice is still there. It's just that the visual isn't. Yeah. You don't need the visual. Yeah,
but it's not. People like to see the fact that you're a bit, you know, you're looking the wrong way. I think.
Agree. You see that at the beginning and the end. But then you get much better audio quality
yeah.
if you turn off the visuals anyway.
Yeah, I think yes, because you don't need them the whole time. Absolutely, but you know, without a little bit of that, then you can have entire classes where nobody really knows what each other looks like, and that then makes it very difficult to do the kind of collaborative work that Diana's talking about, because you need to be able to trust other people if you're going to create something together.
Yeah,
and so, you know, so that's the thing in a sense, isn't it? Is thinking when is the best time to use what tool and for what purpose.
It's all about the planning and the using the technology purposefully, not, you know, because it's fun.